There are trips you take when you're young that feel like the last purely good thing before real life closes in on you. The summer after university, before jobs and mortgages and the slow narrowing of everything. That window is small and most people only get one of them. Ours was a week in the Halden Forest. Me, Rashid, and Kofi. 3 friends since we were 16. The kind of friendships built so early they feel less like choices and more like geography. We just were friends the way rivers just are, where they are. We had done weekend camping trips before. Nothing serious. Organized campsites with facilities. The kind of outdoor experience that is really just sleeping uncomfortably near a barbecue. This was different. This was 7 days, deep trail, no facilities, carrying everything on our backs. Kofi had planned it for months. He was the one among us who actually knew what he was doing outdoors. Grew up hiking, could read a trail map like a page of text. Knew which plants were edible and which would end you. Rashid and I trusted him completely. We should have trusted the silence. We went in on a Monday in late August. The trailhead parking lot had 4 other cars in it when we arrived. A good sign, Kofi said. Not too busy, not too empty. We signed the trail log, shouldered our packs, and went in. The first 2 days were everything we'd wanted. The forest was genuinely beautiful in a way that makes you understand why people do this. Old trees, real old trees. The kind with trunks so wide, 3 people can't link arms around them, and the light coming through the canopy in long, slow columns that moved when the wind moved the leaves. We covered ground well. Kofi set a pace that was challenging without being punishing. We made camp the first night at a site by a stream that Kofi knew from the map, and it was exactly right. Flat ground, clean water, good wood. We sat around the fire until nearly midnight. We talked about everything and nothing, the way you do with people you've known since you were teenagers. Half the conversation is shorthand, references to things that happened years ago. The comfortable compression of long friendship. Rashid kept burning his marshmallows and pretending it was intentional. Kofi told the same story about his first camping trip at 11 that he'd told at least 6 times, but told it well enough that we let him. That first night I slept better than I'd slept in months. The second night was the same. I remember thinking, lying in my sleeping bag on the second night, listening to the stream, this is the trip. This is the one we'll talk about. I was right about that part. The 3rd day was when the forest changed. I don't know how else to describe it. Objectively, nothing changed. Same trees, same trail, same 3 of us walking in the same direction. But sometime in the mid-morning of the 3rd day, the quality of the forest shifted in a way that I felt before I could identify. It took me until almost noon to understand what it was. It was too quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a forest, which isn't really quiet at all. Birds, insects, wind in leaves, small movements everywhere, a constant low texture of sound. This was different. This was a forest that had stopped doing things, like someone had turned a dial. I mentioned it to Rashid around noon when Kofi had moved a little ahead on the trail. Rashid looked around and listened, and then told me I was being strange, and I mostly believed him. By 2 p.m., even Kofi had noticed. He stopped on the trail and stood still for a moment, just listening. Then he looked at his map, and then at the trees, and then back at the map. I asked him what was wrong, and he said nothing was wrong. He just wanted to check our position. but he checked it for longer than checking a position takes, and when he folded the map and put it away, his expression had something in it I hadn't seen on Kofi in 22 years of knowing him. He was uncertain. Kofi was never uncertain about a trail. We made camp that night earlier than planned. Kofi wanted to stop while we still had good light, and I understood that to mean he wanted to be settled and secured before dark, though he didn't say it that way. We found a site, not a marked one, just a clearing that worked, and set up efficiently. The fire took longer than it should have because the wood felt damp, even though it hadn't rained in days. When it finally caught, all three of us sat close to it in a way that was about more than warmth. The forest around us was still silent. Whatever had stopped in the mid-morning hadn't started again. No night insects, which in late August in a forest that size was deeply wrong. That particular sound, the constant electric hum of insects in warm, dark woods, was simply absent. The silence in its place was the kind you can feel on your skin. Rashid said he wanted to sleep early, and Kofi agreed, and I agreed, and we were all in our tents by 9, which was not like us at all. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened to the silence, and I didn't sleep for a long time. At some point, it must have been past midnight, I heard Kofi unzip his tent. I heard him step out. I heard him stand there for a moment. Then I heard him walk away from the camp. Not far. 20, 30 meters maybe. Then stop. I lay still. 5 minutes passed and I unzipped my own tent and stepped out. The fire had burned down to almost nothing. The clearing was lit by a half moon, and the light was enough to see by. Not well, but enough. Kofi was standing at the tree line, his back to me, facing the forest. I said his name quietly. He didn't answer. I said his name again. He turned around. He looked normal. He looked like Kofi. He told me he'd woken up and needed air and had just been listening. I asked him what he was listening to. He said nothing. There was nothing to listen to. That was the point. He came back to the fire and added some wood to it, and we sat there for a while without talking. The fire came back up. The silence didn't change. After about 20 minutes, Kofi went back to his tent and I went back to mine. I lay there for a long time, thinking about the way he'd been standing at the tree line, the quality of it. There was something about the posture, the complete stillness, the forward angle of it, like someone leaning slightly toward something, that it felt less like a man standing in a clearing and more like a man being held in place. That thought didn't make sense, and I put it aside. I put it aside because the alternative was to let it fully form, and I wasn't ready for that at midnight in a silent forest. The 4th day, Rashid woke up sick. Not seriously sick, or not seeming so at first. Headache, nausea, the feeling of something coming on. He insisted it was nothing, and insisted on walking, and we walked but slower, stopping more often, and by early afternoon it was clear he needed to rest. We made camp again early. Rashid went into his tent. Kofi and I made food, and Rashid ate a little of it, and went back to sleep. And Kofi and I sat by the fire and had the conversation we'd been not having for a day. I told Kofi about the forest going quiet, what I'd felt on the 3rd day. He listened, and then said he'd felt it too, and had been trying to identify what it meant in practical terms, whether we'd entered a zone with different ecology, whether there'd been a predator moving through that had displaced the wildlife, whether there was something about the specific geography of that section of trail that created a different acoustic environment. He was very calm and methodical about it, which was so Kofi that it was almost reassuring. Then he told me about the night before. Standing at the tree line, he told me something he hadn't said when I'd found him out there. He'd woken up not because he needed air, but because of a sound. A sound from the forest, from a specific direction. Not close, but not far. Maybe 60 meters into the trees. He described it as a knocking sound. Rhythmic. Not like an animal and not like a branch against a branch. Like something being struck deliberately. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, in a pattern that repeated for several minutes. He had followed it to the tree line and stood there listening to it, and while he was standing there, it stopped. He hadn't been standing listening to the silence. He'd been standing at the exact point where the sound had been coming from, trying to locate its source. I asked why he hadn't woken me when he'd first heard it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he hadn't wanted to wake me because the sound had felt. He used this word carefully, inviting, not threatening, not alarming. The way certain music feels like it's directing you towards something. He'd followed it to the tree line and been about to walk into the trees when he heard me say his name. He stopped there. I looked at him across the fire. He looked back at me, and I could see that he understood the weight of what he'd just said. He'd been walking into the forest at midnight toward a sound, and had stopped only because I'd called him. I didn't say what I was thinking. Kofi was already saying it to himself. I could see it in his face. Instead, I asked him if it happened again. Would he wake me? He said yes. I believed him. Rashid was worse in the morning. Fever now. Real fever. And the headache bad enough that he was having trouble keeping his eyes open in normal daylight. He was apologetic about it. Rashid always apologetic about any inconvenience. And Kofi cut that off immediately and told him we were going to talk about our options. Our options were push through to the next trail marker and hope for phone signal, which we hadn't had since day one. Turn around and walk out, which was 2 full days back to the trailhead, or stay put and wait for Rashid to improve. Kofi pulled out the map and showed us a third option. There was a Forest Service road about 6 kilometers west, off trail. If we could reach it, we could potentially flag down a vehicle or reach the ranger station that was marked at the road's junction. 6 kilometers through forest with no trail, with a sick person. Rashid said he could walk it. He said it firmly, the way he said things when he'd already decided and didn't want to discuss it. Kofi said he'd be carrying Rashid's pack and his own. Rashid said fine. We broke camp. Off-trail in dense forest is a different experience from trail walking in every way. There's no rhythm to it. You're reading the ground constantly, finding the path of least resistance through undergrowth and fallen timber, checking the compass, more often than feels necessary. Kofi led, and he was good at it, finding lines through the trees that felt almost like paths, even when they weren't. We covered 3 kilometers in about 2 hours. Rashid was managing, but the fever was making him slow and unsteady, and we stopped often, and Kofi gave him water constantly. At the 3-kilometer mark, we stopped for longer. Rashid sat against a tree and closed his eyes, and Kofi and I stood a few meters away talking quietly about pace and distance and whether we could make the road before dark. Kofi was mid-sentence when he stopped. He was looking past me. I turned around. About 30 meters back the way we'd come, standing between two trees, was a figure. I want to be very careful here about what I tell you I saw, because I have gone over it hundreds of times, and I want to give you the true version, not the version that sounds the most like a story. It was a figure, human in shape, upright, 2 legs, 2 arms, head, the right height for a person, but it was completely still in the way that people are not still when they're standing in a forest. No micro adjustments, no shifting of weight, no movement of the head or hands. Absolute stillness, the kind that belongs to something that is not managing the ongoing work of being a body. It was too dark in color to make out detail at 30 meters through trees. Not wearing bright clothing. It could have been a person in dark outdoor gear. It could have been many things. What it was doing was watching us. I said quietly to Kofi, "There's someone behind us." He said he saw it. We both looked at it. It didn't move. I called out, "Hey, hello, are you all right?" The normal things you call to someone in a forest. My voice sounded strange in the silence, too loud, swallowed by the trees quickly. Nothing from the figure. No response. No movement. Kofi said quietly that we should keep moving. I agreed. We got Rashid up and we walked. We didn't run. Kofi later said that was the right instinct, not to run. That running changes things. That running is a statement. And he didn't want to make that statement. I checked back twice in the first 5 minutes. The second time I checked, the figure was closer. Not 30 meters now, maybe 20. Still moving in that way that registered as wrong. I hadn't seen it walk, hadn't seen it cover the ground between where it had been and where it was now, hadn't caught any movement. It was just different amounts of distance every time I looked. I told Kofi, and he told me to stop looking back. I stopped looking back. We reached the service road 90 minutes later. I've walked distances in that forest since, retraced sections of that route on subsequent trips that I took with people who had no idea what I was doing or why. The geometry doesn't work. That last section of forest, given our pace with a sick person, should have taken twice that long. We moved fast in a way that didn't feel like us choosing to move fast. On the road, a ranger truck came past within 20 minutes. Kofi flagged it. The ranger took Rashid in the truck and radioed for help and called my phone number and Kofi's and told us to wait by the road. Someone would come for us. We sat on the road's edge. Kofi sat with his elbows on his knees and stared at the gravel. I looked at the tree line. Nothing there. Just forest. I asked Kofi if he thought we'd imagined it. He said no. I asked him if he thought it had followed us the whole way. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said he thought it had been there since the 3rd day, since the forest went quiet. He thought the silence and the figure were the same thing, or connected, that the silence was what happened to a forest when that thing moved into it, the way an oil spill changes everything in the water around it. He said he thought the sound that had woken him on the 3rd night, the knocking, the 3-beat pattern, he thought it had been calling to him specifically. That something about his particular way of being in that forest, his confidence, his knowledge of it, the ease with which he read and moved through it, had attracted something's attention. He said he thought if I hadn't called his name, he would have walked into the trees and not come back. We sat with that for a while. The ranger's colleague came in a second truck and drove us to the station, and from there, we arranged to get back to our car. We drove home, mostly in silence. Rashid was fine. A virus, the doctor said. Nasty, but not serious. He was better within a week. He didn't see the figure. He'd been eyes closed against the tree when Kofi and I saw it, and we never told him. We discussed it once, Kofi and I, whether to tell him, and decided there was nothing useful in the telling. He'd been sick and frightened, and he got better. What purpose would it serve? Kofi and I went back to camping after that. Both of us. We've been on maybe 15 trips since then, sometimes together, sometimes with other people. Different forests, different regions. Nothing has happened. But here is what I'll tell you about Kofi and what I noticed the year after. He changed the way he moved through forests. Not dramatically. Not in any way that people who didn't know him well would see. But I know Kofi and I know how he used to be outdoors. The ease of him. The way he belonged in that environment as naturally as he belonged anywhere. After Halden, he was always slightly alert. Slightly angled toward the sound of the forest. Checking the trees when he thought nobody was watching. On a trip 2 years later, I caught him standing at the edge of our camp at night. Very still, head turned slightly, like he was listening. I asked him if he heard something. He looked at me. He said no, nothing, he was just looking. He came and sat by the fire, but he kept his face tilted toward the dark between the trees, and I watched him do it and said nothing. Because there are some things you can't fix by naming them. We just sat there. The forest made its sounds around us. Normal sounds. Insects. Wind. The small movements of things going about their business. Normal. I told myself, normal. I want to end by saying this. The trail log at the Halden trailhead. We signed in. A park system. Records kept. The way these things work. A year after our trip, I submitted a Freedom of Information request for the log entries for that trail in a 6-month period around our visit. 7 groups signed in. 4 groups signed out. The Park Service's response to my follow-up inquiry was that the trail was remote and some hikers exited via alternative routes or failed to sign out for various reasons, and this was not uncommon for that particular trail. 3 groups. I've thought about those 3 groups constantly. I've thought about whether they went in after the forest went quiet, whether they heard a 3-beat knocking sound in the night, whether someone was awake to say their name at the tree line. I don't have answers. I don't think the Park Service has answers either. Or at least not answers they're sharing with me. What I have is this. My 2 best friends came home from that forest, and every year that continues to be true feels like something given back that was close to being taken.